Hey guys, it's Mike Krupa here on this beautiful morning of November 6th, 2024. What can I say? It's morning in America. It's also morning here, or rather just past noon here in Poland. We're obviously still a little bit sleepy because we were following the election results all night long here in at the Krupa household. As you can see, I got my proper memorabilia on me. This shirt actually goes way back to the 2016 campaign. It was something me and my friend made as a sign of support for Trump's insurgent campaign back in 2016. So it brings back a lot of memories of that great campaign. I think I was possibly one of the few Polish guys in Poland or political junior commentators at that time. That was way before my PhD. That I actually predicted back in 2015 that Trump would actually win the presidency. So I'm happy to announce that this time I also was right on the mark. Not only that, but I also predicted that JD Vance would become Trump's VP. So we're all taking it in. I think it's a historical victory for Trump, the way he just swept through Pennsylvania, the way that the Senate was taking the House of Representatives, and the way he's building a new majority and a new coalition within the Republican Party. Something akin to the new majority which Richard Nixon built in the early 70s with the help of such great advisors as Pat Buchanan, for example. And I'm actually going to start off this vid by quoting from Pat Buchanan's biography, although I want to emphasize in this video what I think Trump's presidency, Trump's second term might or should mean for Poland. I'd just like to begin with a quote from Buchanan's biography, Pat Buchanan's biography, written by Tim Stanley. The book was published, I think, in 2013. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. The title is Crusader, The Life and Tumultuous Times of Pat Buchanan. And in that book, there's an interesting quote which I think reflects a lot of what the forgotten Americans, the middle Americans, the silent majority, sort of reflected by voting for Donald Trump in 2016 and in 2024 and in 2020, obviously. It's a quote in Tim Stanley's book, which goes like this. Buchanan's America, a world of religious mystery, Joe McCarthy, obedient wives, patriotic teamsters, Latin masses, Saturday night at the movies, Buck Rogers, apple pie, stink bombs, and Sputniks was long gone. Even Georgetown was now a plush shopping district, more Ralph Lauren than Roman Catholic. When country and Western singer Johnny Cash died in 2003, Pat said in an interview, "Johnny Cash is gone, and it is fitting because the America we grew up in is gone too. We grew up in another country. Johnny Cash wrote and sang our songs." End quote. Another country, indeed. I think the longing for a better America, a different America, was the general motivator for people who voted for Trump in all three election cycles. But I think at this point, with all the crazy wokeness going around and being on the precipice of World War III, I think the longing for an older America, a better America, a saner America, was that motivational factor. And yesterday, while commenting for a Polish program on the election results, just a few hours before, I pointed out that this election is sort of akin to, in a symbolic way, Clint Eastwood versus P. Diddy. And I think I was right on the mark there, and a lot of people complimented me on that. So Clint Eastwood obviously representing the old America, the better America, the Buchanan America, so to say. And P. Diddy obviously representing, wokeness, Jeffrey Epstein, and the like, the more demonic America. But I'd like to concentrate on the main theme of my comment this morning, which is what we can expect from a Trump presidency regarding Poland. Now, you have to remember that after 1989, when Poland de facto became a subordinate country of American hegemony. I mean, we joined NATO. We were one of the most fervent pro-American countries and still are in Europe. We went into Iraq with the United States. We went into Afghanistan. I don't need to tell you the entire story of our involvement in the proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. So basically, the modus operandi of every American administration after 1989 was basically to, whenever an American president would come to Poland, he would always have to sort of signify or signal that there's a potential threat in the East, i.e. Russia. And we, the Americans, are the cavalry coming to save you poor Poles from those pesky, bastardly Russians who are just waiting to invade your country. It was a theme that was, emphasized to a larger extent in every speech of an American president who visited Poland, especially after the Maidan revolt in Ukraine. I actually attended the speech by Barack Obama in Warsaw in 2014, and Donald Trump's speech in 2017 in Warsaw, which also had some of these, I would say, neoconish reference points that, out there in the East is Russia, and I, the American president, am your savior, am your protector. That was an overriding theme in many of these speeches that occurred in Poland from the heads of state from American presidents. And actually in 2014, it's interesting that one of Poland's most prominent philosophers, Professor Bronisław Łagowski, he observed in an interesting article the following when commenting on how American presidents make these references to the threat from the East. So Professor Łagowski wrote that when Napoleon came to Poland, when Napoleon came to Warsaw, his minister Talleyrand instructed him how he should try to convince the Poles and how he should endear himself to them. And the way that he would do that was, this is Talleyrand talking to Napoleon, you have to condemn Russia and remind the Poles of John Sobieski's great victory at the Battle of Vienna. And Professor Łagowski goes on to write that Barack Obama was also well prepared. He mentioned the economic miracle on the Vistula, and he gave a first-rate rebuttal. The spark of change in Europe came from Poland. Russia also was criticized. Poles are made of plasticine, and with the help, let me just move this a little bit here, with the help of flattery, you can mold them. What you want when you are an American. In Washington, they know this very well and take their game on Polish vanity to the point of cynicism. So, end quote. As you can see, it doesn't take a lot to play on Polish vanity, especially when you're an American president. So those two crucial aspects are always somehow in the background when American presidents make major speeches in Poland. So you make that condemnation of Russia, that Russia is just lurking around the corner, and then you pat the Poles on the back that, you won at Vienna, you had Copernicus, you had the Warsaw Uprising, you had John Paul II, you had Lech Walesa, yada, 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 you're a great nation. And that's why we have to subordinate you to our policy and use you in our shenanigans against Russia. And Poles are very willing to execute this foreign policy because we really don't need a big push, at least our political elites don't need such a firm push to be anti-Russian, which in general means being anti-rational. But I think right now, with Trump's second term, we are to believe his, I think, sincere motivations in ending the Ukraine war and reaching some sort of modus vivendi, at least stabilizing Russian-American relations. That'll obviously have its impact on Poland. Hopefully, it might give us an opening where, if our elites are smart and pragmatic, and I think the current government in power right now in Poland, despite its many shortcomings, and I'm by no means its fan, has a history of being pragmatic regarding Russia when the West became pragmatic regarding Russia. I'd just like to remind you that when Barack Obama initiated his famous reset, which obviously wasn't no reset at all, but the signal was there that we wanted to stabilize relations with Russia after, the chaos of the Bush years regarding Russia, Georgia, and NATO expansion. Poland went along with that. And as a matter of fact, Donald Tusk met with Vladimir Putin, something which is unimaginable today. There are statements that he made at that time which sounded very rational. For example, that Poland shouldn't be the first, anti-Russian sword waver in Europe. That we have to have a realistic outlook on the situation in Ukraine, on the situation in Georgia. That we're not trying to channel any praise for Putin, but we understand that Putin is there, that Russia is there. It's not going anywhere, and we have to find some sort of model of stable relations with Moscow. So it was a very realistic outlook, and this was during Donald Tusk's first stint at power back in 2007, 2008, 2009, 2011, 2012, 2013. The Maidan obviously changed that, and along with the changes that came in American policy came changes in Polish foreign policy automatically. Unfortunately, we're not a fully sovereign country, so whatever Washington, if Washington sneezes, then Warsaw has to automatically sneeze too. That's the way it is, unfortunately, after 1989. So, being a little bit cynical at this point, I think that if Trump were to initiate, a new détente with Russia, I believe we would have to play along. We would have no choice, which is a good thing because Poland needs at least stable and predictable relations with Moscow. It cannot be that after 10 years of being in power, Polish President Andrzej Duda has not once met with the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. That's insane. You don't meet with your largest neighbor, with what used to be a big trading partner of Poland, and the world's premier nuclear power. You can't ignore that. That doesn't make any sense. Unless you're not a sovereign country and you're just waiting for instructions from Washington. Then obviously that does make sense. However, I think the idea is to make Poland a sovereign country. So Trump's approach to Russia can give us an opening which might stabilize relations in the near term. At least we could lower the level of hostility and obviously along with that change our relations with the Kiev regime, which is something that has been signaled by the current government in Poland, including Radosław Sikorski, when he talks about the Volyn massacre and the need to exhume the bodies of the victims. There was also, a statement by him, which a few months ago would have been very controversial, that Ukrainian men who are sitting in Europe and taking, social benefits should be sent to the front to Ukraine, and that European governments should help in that. And obviously that level of sincerity, which he made clear, and I remind you, Radosław Sikorski is the Minister of Foreign Affairs, made clear during his prank phone call. He obviously didn't know he was being pranked by Woban and Lexus, where he said that, we caution against escalation and entering of Poland into the conflict in Ukraine in any way. That was made pretty manifest during that discussion. So if Trump were to initiate an opening with Russia in ending the war with Ukraine, Poland would have to find its way in this new paradigm in the East. And we would actually have no choice but to seek some sort of our mini détente with Moscow. Now, if the former government of Law and Justice was in power, because they are fanatically and ideologically Russophobic, I believe we'd hear a lot of protestations that we've been betrayed again, yada, 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 yada. But I think the liberals, and I think this has been proven already, are more pragmatic in that they will go along with whatever the collective West, i.e. the leader of the collective West at this point, the United States, dictates or demands regarding Russia. And since we are a hub for anti-Russian activity, Newsweek a few months back called Poland basically the CIA's hub in Europe, with all the things going on in Ukraine. I think the level of activity directed against Russia will automatically have to cease, especially if you consider, and I think this will be the credo of Trump's hopefully more saner foreign policy. It's a credo that was laid out in the Financial Times in February of this year by none other than J.D. Vance, the Vice President-elect of the United States, who wrote the following: "We owe it to our European partners to be honest. Americans want allies in Europe, not client states. and our generosity in Ukraine is coming to an end. Europeans should regard the conclusion of the war there as an imperative. They must keep rebuilding their industrial and military capabilities. And Europe should consider how exactly it is going to live with Russia when the war in Ukraine is over. I repeat, Europe should consider how exactly it is going to live with Russia when the war in Ukraine is over. End quote. I mean, you can't get more clear than that. It's an acknowledgement that Russia isn't going anywhere, that Putin isn't going anywhere, that these, fantasies of color revolution are just that, fantasies. And it's imperative that we start thinking now how we're going to live with Russia the way that it is constructed at this point with the current government, whether we like him or not, how we're going to establish relations post-war in Ukraine. That is a very clear signal from Vance, and I think him being on the ticket and being in the future administration, he's going to be a leading voice in this, realist renaissance in American foreign policy, at least regarding Russia and Ukraine. I'm not commenting here on, China, the Middle East, and so on. I'm just commenting on this one aspect of Ukraine, Russia, and Poland. So we can substitute, that quote where JD says, and Europe should consider, we can say, and Poland should consider how exactly it is going to live with Russia when the war in Ukraine is over. Because guess what, Poland, guess what, Polish politicians, Russia isn't going anywhere. It's not going anywhere. And, one of the great realist dictums in foreign policy is it's good to have friends closer and enemies far, and not the other way around. Enemies closer and friends far, or on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. It's important to note that we could get an opening that might stabilize relations with Russia, which I hope will be seriously considered by the current government, which has already shown in its past iteration that it was willing to accommodate a more realist approach to Moscow, obviously due to the fact that there was pressure coming from the West, that Obama was doing his so-called reset, but nonetheless, it did serve Polish interests, and it should serve Polish interests in the long run to have stable, pragmatic, even good relations with the Russian Federation. The more stable the more stable the situation in Eastern Europe, the less tensions, the further we are from a nuclear escalation, the better from Poland. I mean, that's a no-brainer. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that. So that would be the first expectation that I would have vis-a-vis the new administration in Washington, that things in relations to Russia are going to change from Warsaw's perspective. They will, as a matter of fact, have to change. The second thing that I would point to is the fact that the Department of State, via the American diplomatic mission in Poland, i.e. the U.S. Embassy in Poland, has been an engine of wokeness for the last couple of years. And this actually applies to the last two ambassadors, including the one that was nominated by President Trump during his first administration, Georgette Mosbacher, who was a total disaster. She literally acted as she was, well, in a way she was, a proconsul here, basically dictating to people what they should do. And Mark Brzezinski has been even worse on this topic, promoting LGBT, wokeness, BLM, the whole alphabet soup. And I'm thinking, and I hope that the next ambassador in Poland is at least going to end, this propaganda of woke BS in Poland. And as a matter of fact, I think one of the nominees that Trump should seriously consider for ambassador in Poland is none other than Ed Martin of Eagle Forum. And I think even Roger Stone made a pitch to him a few years back that Ed Martin would make a great ambassador to Poland. I might have that wrong, but Mr. Martin, you would be a welcome introduction as an American ambassador to Poland. And we know that under your governance of the embassy, we would only see the United States flag flying at the American embassy and not the rainbow flag or the BLM flag. And we won't have American ambassadors, intervening in Polish internal politics and trying to change the cultural landscape, which is still fairly socially conservative on the key issues, especially the issue of marriage. I hope it'll stay that way. That we won't see any interventions from the American embassy in trying to change the cultural code of Poland. So, those are my initial comments on this Wednesday, November the 6th, 2024. I think by now we can celebrate a new opening in the West, that Kamala was defeated, that we have another chance at rebuilding many things, including here in Poland, and you, my American followers and friends in the United States especially. Hopefully a lot of good things will come out of this new administration. There's a lot of exciting news coming out already about, possible nominations and so on. So I think today I'm going to spend the rest of the day just basically celebrating with this and with this. So this has been Mike Krupa from the Krupa household out here in Poland. Short commentary on what to hopefully expect from a new Trump administration vis-a-vis Poland. See you guys soon. Take care. God bless.